The name Mesopotamia, meaning between the rivers in Greek, was given by the Romans to describe the area between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which was once Rome's easternmost province. This region now largely corresponds to modern-day Iraq, though historically it included parts of present-day Syria. Mesopotamia is characterized by vast plains created by the alluvial deposits of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which flow through a rift valley formed by the tectonic activity between the African and Eurasian plates. While the Tigris flows relatively straight through the valley, the Euphrates takes a wider loop through modern Syria before joining the Tigris and flowing into the Persian Gulf. By around 15,000 BCE, the Persian Gulf was not a body of water but dry land. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which now flow into the Persian Gulf, originally flowed south into the Gulf of Oman, approximately 500 miles away from where they flow today. In the Holocene, following 12,000 BC, sea levels began to rise rapidly. By 6000 BC, sea levels were about 66 feet lower than they are today. Between 4000 and 3000 BC, sea levels rose to about 7 feet above current levels. This rising sea level is consistent with a global trend during this period. As sea levels rose, sediment carried by the rivers, called alluvium, accumulated in the Persian Gulf, creating a vast delta that extended gradually southward. This process also led to the formation of freshwater lakes and marshes in the region. The thick layers of sediment deposited by the rising sea levels covers any archaeological evidence of human activity from the late Ice Age or early Holocene period in the lowlands. Despite the challenges in finding physical evidence, it's likely that both hunter-gatherers and early farmers lived in the low-lying areas of the Persian Gulf during these times. They would have relied on the rich resources of the region, such as fish and other aquatic resources, for their subsistence. The dramatic environmental changes at the end of the Ice Age were crucial in shaping the rise of city-states in southern Mesopotamia. Key ecological factors included the drastic changes in sea levels and significant climatic variability, especially during the 5th millennium BC. During this time, summer temperatures were higher, and there was more rainfall, which extended the growing season for crops. The higher water table allowed some areas to be farmed without irrigation, but as conditions changed, irrigation became necessary. Within Iraq, there is a notable climatic divide. The northern and eastern regions receive enough rainfall to support vegetation, while the western and southern regions do not. Agriculture in southern Mesopotamia, or Babylonia, which is the area between modern Baghdad and the head of the Persian Gulf, has always relied on artificial irrigation due to the lack of natural rainfall. In contrast to Syria, in the northern part of Iraq, could largely rely on natural precipitation. Like other early civilizations centered around rivers, such as those in Egypt, China, and India, Mesopotamia depended heavily on its rivers. However, unlike the Nile, which reliably deposits fertile sediment on Egyptian lands, the Tigris and Euphrates overflow irregularly and often dangerously, complicating agricultural activities. Despite these challenges, the abundant water provided by these rivers was crucial for the development of intensive agriculture and consequently early Mesopotamian civilization. Mesopotamia's alluvial plains lacked raw materials such as metal and usable stone, except for a small limestone deposit near Samarra. The north and east, however, had ample stone, including alabaster from the northeastern mountains used in Neo-Assyrian palaces. The region also imported materials like carnelian, lapis lazuli, and obsidian from surrounding areas. Metals such as copper and silver were sourced from various places, though the exact origins are unclear. Asphalt, a natural resource, was used extensively from around 3500 BCE for inlay mortar and fuel. Mesopotamia's open geography made it a crossroads for diverse peoples, often arriving as conquerors or immigrants. This continuous influx created a rich tapestry of cultures and ethnicities. The earliest written records don't clarify the ethnic makeup of the region's inhabitants, but the Sumerians were likely significant contributors to the early urban civilization in southern Mesopotamia by the 4th millennium BCE. Around the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, the writing system in Mesopotamia began to represent spoken language more accurately. Initially, documents were written in Sumerian, although many non-Sumerian words, particularly place names, suggest the presence of earlier indigenous languages. This indicates a diverse population living together before the large-scale immigration of the 4th millennium BCE. The use of Sumerian for writing lasted about 2 centuries. When Sargon of Akkad, a Semitic ruler, came to power around 2350 BCE, Akkadian, a Semitic language, became the dominant written language, using the same cuneiform script. However, Sumerian resurfaced for a time before the Semitic languages permanently took over. Despite this shift, linguistic records show that Sumerian continued to be spoken until around 2000 BCE, highlighting the coexistence and intermingling of different ethnic groups. From the 2nd millennium BCE onward, new waves of immigrants, primarily of Semitic origin, entered Mesopotamia. These included the Amorites and Arameans, who further influenced the region's linguistic landscape. The Hurrians, another significant group, adapted the cuneiform script to their language and influenced the Akkadian language, creating a distinct Hurrido-Akkadian dialect. Other groups, such as the Kassites, who dominated Babylonia for a time, also contributed to the region's ethnic mosaic. Throughout Mesopotamian history, various ethnic groups lived together and intermarried, making it nearly impossible to trace any modern group back to a singular origin. The continual influx and amalgamation of different peoples profoundly shaped Mesopotamian civilization, contributing to its rich cultural diversity. By 12,000 years ago, lifestyles in the Fertile Crescent, Eastern Mediterranean, and parts of Europe were quite similar. About 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals inhabited those regions where the climate supported a diverse range of game and edible plants. However, around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, modern humans began migrating into these areas from Africa, gradually interbreeding with and ultimately replacing Neanderthals. By around 30,000 years ago, Neanderthals had disappeared, with modern humans becoming the dominant species in these regions. As modern humans settled in this region, they began to develop new ways of living that set them apart from neighboring areas. Around 10,000 BCE, the first signs of domesticated plants and animals appeared, along with more permanent dwellings. Sedentism likely began because early humans preferred to remain in favorable areas as long as possible. These locations were chosen for their proximity to water and diverse environments, which supported a wide variety of plants and animals. The development of food storage techniques was crucial for these early settlers. By storing surplus food, they could survive periods when hunting and gathering were not sufficient. This led to the domestication of animals and the cultivation of crops such as einkorn, emmer wheat, barley, lentils, and peas. Initially, agriculture and animal husbandry supplemented a diet still largely based on hunting, fishing, and gathering. However, over time, food production became more reliable, reducing the need for large hunting territories and allowing settlements to move closer together. As settlements grew closer and more dependent on agriculture, conflicts between neighboring groups became more common. This increase in conflict necessitated new forms of social organization, and leadership to manage disputes and maintain order. Early settlements were characterized by a mixed economy and a developing social hierarchy, laying the foundations for the complex societies that would later emerge in Mesopotamia. While archaeological evidence from this period is limited, the increased use of storage containers suggests a more complex economic structure and the beginnings of organized community life. The large-scale production of pottery began in the 7th millennium BCE, marking a significant technological and economic advancement. Pottery vessels were not merely functional as containers, they also served as a means of cultural expression and identity. The surfaces of these vessels were often decorated with a wide range of patterns and motifs, which were incised or painted to signify membership and define group identity. The shapes and decorations of pottery were influenced by changing fashions and technological developments, making pottery a key tool for archaeologists to date specific periods or regions, even when only fragments are available. In the early pottery periods of the 7th millennium BCE, much remains unknown about the specific characteristics of settlement buildings. However, it is evident that early societies placed importance on marking property and storing information. Seals were used to stamp marks on clay lids or fasteners of containers, indicating ownership. Clay tokens of various shapes were employed as mnemonic devices to record numbers or quantities, reflecting an early need to document and manage resources. As agricultural methods improved and new technologies like pottery were developed, village communities in the Zagros foothills, east of Mesopotamia, began to thrive. By around 7000 BCE, farming communities were established on the Assyrian plains. Initially, these communities relied on seasonal rainfall to water their crops. However, over time, they moved closer to rivers and developed simple irrigation techniques to water their fields. The Hassuna culture, dating from around 6000 to 5300 BCE and named after Tel Hassuna in northern Iraq, marks one of the earliest farming communities in ancient Assyria. This period represents a shift from nomadic to settled agricultural life, characterized by distinctive pottery, architecture, and farming practices. Tel Megzaliah is a key site of the Hassuna culture, showcasing compact villages and early agricultural practices. Hassunan pottery, handmade from coarse clay, features simple geometric designs like dots and circles. This practical pottery was used for storing grains, cooking, and carrying water. The widespread presence of Hassunan pottery, from the upper Tigris Valley to the west of Mosul, highlights extensive trade and cultural exchange in northern Mesopotamia. Hassunan communities like Tel Megzaliah practice dry farming, relying on natural rainfall to grow crops such as wheat and barley. Their villages consisted of small mud brick houses clustered together, reflecting a simple social structure with minimal stratification. The Hassuna culture played a crucial role in the development of early Mesopotamian societies, laying the groundwork for more advanced cultures like the Halafian and Samarran. The shift to settled agriculture and pottery production paved the way for complex social and economic networks in the region. By at least 6000 BCE, farmers using irrigation techniques had settled between Mosul in the north and Baghdad in the south, in places like the Samarra region. Here, irrigation was necessary due to the dry conditions. The excavation of Tel Es Sawan, located within the early Islamic Abbasid city complex of Samarra on the left embankment of the Tigris, provides valuable information about the structure of a 6th millennium BCE settlement. When fully uncovered, the site revealed 10 freestanding building complexes of uniform size, all enclosed within a nearly quadrangular system of walls and a moat. Notably, none of the houses distinguished itself in terms of size, layout, or furnishings, suggesting that if a leadership structure existed, it left no discernible archaeological trace. The pottery found at Tel Es Sawan is known as Samarra ware. Samarra pottery is characterized by concentric lines and bands on the exteriors and swirling motifs on the interiors of open bowls, often depicting human figures with hair blowing to one side. These vessels were handmade with medium-thick walls, typically painted in a single color. The surface of Samarra pottery is matte. It was widely distributed across various regions, from the vicinity of Mosul and Hassuna to the area where the Euphrates enters what is now Iraq called Baghouz, and eastward to the Zagros Mountains in Chogamami. Similar house layouts, along with comparable human and animal figurines found in these areas, suggest the presence of a distinct cultural unit, referred to as the Samarra culture. The Samarran farmers, living in large, well-established villages like Chogamami, developed irrigation methods that allowed them to grow crops such as wheat, barley, and linseed. These techniques enabled them to farm in areas that were otherwise unsuitable for agriculture, allowing them to build strong communities and establish social and economic connections that laid the groundwork for more complex societies. Around 6000 BCE, farmers across Southwest Asia began creating a new style of painted pottery, moving away from their previous monochrome designs. This new style spread widely, including to northern Iraq, where the Halafian culture developed. The Halafians, who lived in what had been Hassunan territory, produced brightly painted pottery with elaborate patterns and traded these items over long distances. Their pottery and other goods like obsidian and semi-precious stones were traded between villages, fostering connections over hundreds of miles. The Halafians lived similarly to their predecessors, but engaged in extensive trade, suggesting the emergence of more structured societies. In some areas, certain villages became key trade centers, producing fine pottery and other luxury goods. This concentration of production and trade hints at the development of social hierarchies and the formation of chiefdoms, with elites using these goods to display status and maintain authority, much like the Hopewell culture in North America. The pottery from these two cultures shows significant differences. In contrast to Samarra ware, Halaf pottery features more diverse patterns, including self-contained designs that divide the vessel's surface into distinct fields rather than following its curvature. Halaf pottery often exhibits a multicolored appearance due to the intentional use of different paints and shading effects caused by the firing process. These vessels, also handmade, come in various forms, including oval, rectangular, or fanciful shapes with thin walls and high, funnel-shaped rims. The most notable aspect of Halaf pottery is its high-gloss finish, achieved through a complex process of painting with fine clay containing iron oxides and meticulously controlled firing conditions. This technique produced a shiny surface similar to the later Greek red and black figured vases. The technological and artistic differences between Samarra and Halaf pottery, along with the contrasting architectural styles, suggest that these were fundamentally distinct cultural units. In the 6th millennium BCE, the Samarra culture and the Halaf culture were separated by cultural differences, but it is unclear if this separation also reflects ethnic differences. Despite their differences, both groups lacked identifiable public buildings, such as temples or communal spaces, which might suggest a shared structure in religious or political practices. When comparing Samarra culture with the contemporaneous Halaf culture, both exhibit internal similarities in pottery, figurines, seals, amulets, and specific house shapes. Halaf houses were round with rectangular antechambers, and the Halaf culture's distribution extended throughout Syria, southeastern Anatolia, and Mesopotamia up to the Tigris River. Thus, Halaf culture is largely complementary to Samarra culture, with only limited overlaps. Both the Samarra and Halaf cultures eventually merged into what is known as the Ubaid culture in the 5th millennium BCE. The Ubaid culture is characterized by distinctive pottery and a unique house design, featuring a large central hall. Before 6000 BC, small, self-sufficient villages with populations of 50 to 200 people were common. However, with time these villages started to decline, and people began living in larger towns. As environmental conditions became less stable, interactions between communities increased, likely due to shortages of resources. By around 4600 BC, settlements were connected by canals, pottery was produced using wheels instead of by hand, and temples became more common. Around 5800 BC, the first known farming communities appeared in the lowlands along the Euphrates River. These small communities were often grouped together, with the largest cluster surrounding a larger town that covered about 10 hectares and had a population of 2,500 to 4,000 people. The people in these communities built small canals, up to 5 kilometers long, to irrigate their fields. They mainly grew barley and dates and raised cattle, sheep, and goats. These early settlements are collectively known as Ubaid, named after a small site called Al-Ubaid near the ancient city of Ur. The Ubaid people faced a harsh environment and had to work together as a community to survive. They used the abundant local resources like sand, clay, palm trees, and reeds to build their homes. Creating even a small canal required some level of political and social organization, and maintaining these water systems needed communal effort. The annual task of clearing silt from the clogged river courses and canals was a back-breaking job that required everyone to pitch in. There is a close relationship between the development of a stratified society and the creation of food surpluses. The Ubaid villages developed more efficient systems for producing food, which led to an increase in food surpluses. This success encouraged people to settle down in one place and led to higher population densities. The expanded trade networks, facilitated by waterways, and the distribution of surpluses and trade goods also had an impact on society. The dominant groups within these communities played a significant role in producing surpluses, which eventually supported more people who were not directly involved in farming. The earliest known Ubaid community is Tel al-Aweli near Larsa, dating back to around 5800 BCE. Over the next few centuries, some of the larger settlements developed substantial buildings, alleyways, and courtyards. In contrast, rural settlements like Al-Ubaid consisted of simple mud brick and reed huts with roofs made of bent sticks. These small clusters of villages shared ceremonial centers and were connected by kinship and clan ties, with one clan authority overseeing the villagers' affairs and managing the irrigation systems. By the mid-4th millennium BC, the climate and landscape in Mesopotamia had stabilized. This stability allowed for the development of large-scale irrigation systems and supported the growth of much larger communities. People who had previously lived in scattered villages moved to more favorable locations, providing the labor needed to build and manage extensive irrigation systems. This period saw the rise of large cities in southern Mesopotamia, which were the first urban societies in the world to develop writing. The formation of these cities between 3500 and 3000 BC coincided with the stabilization of local sea levels, showing how environmental changes influenced the development of early civilizations. Ubaid culture is recognized by a unique style of pottery and a particular house design with a large central hall. A new tool called the turntable was introduced during the Ubaid period, making pottery production easier and faster. This turntable could spin around a central spike. allowing potters to paint decorative patterns like concentric bands on the pottery as it turned. This innovation helped make pottery making more of a profession. The exact origin of this technology is unknown, but it could have come from anywhere in what is now Iraq. The Ubaid houses had a unique design where the central hall was used both as the main living area and as the connecting space between rooms. This was different from previous house designs, where functional rooms were separate from the connecting spaces. This new house design and pottery-making techniques spread throughout the regions once occupied by the Samarra and Halaf cultures, suggesting a shared network of communication across the Near East by this time. As settlements grew and became more organized, two important concepts emerged: central places and central functions. A central place was a larger settlement that not only served its own residents but also provided services to nearby communities, becoming an administrative, religious, or political center. This relationship between the central place and its surrounding settlements is known as a settlement system. The first examples of public buildings serving these central functions appeared during the Ubaid period, indicating a more complex society. These buildings, identified as temples in places like Eridu or palaces in Awili, likely served as the seats of religious or political authority. As time went on, the small village ceremonial centers grew, including the one at Eridu, which was first settled around 4750 BC. Eridu grew rapidly and featured a mud brick temple surrounded by substantial mud brick houses, often with rectangular floor plans. Crafts workers lived close to the elite, who were centered around the temple, while farmers lived farther away and grew crops that supported everyone. By 4500 BC, the Eridu temple had expanded significantly, with altars, offering places, and a central room surrounded by smaller compartments. The population of Eridu had grown to around 5,000 people, although the exact numbers are uncertain. The people of Ubaid also engaged in trade, and their distinctive pottery has been found in regions as far away as Iran, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Excavations at Tel Zaydan in modern-day Syria have provided new insights into Ubaid trading activities between 5000 and 4400 BC. Before the Ubaid period, early settlements were mostly found in mountainous or hilly areas. It wasn't until the Ubaid period that people began settling in the large central plains, which had been sparsely occupied before. Settlements like Susa and Chogamish in Kazakhstan became central places within a three-tiered system of settlements: large central places at the top, smaller centers below them, and even smaller settlements at the lowest level. These central places were large enough to support people involved in public service who relied on others for food, which was often supplied by the surrounding countryside. While it would have been interesting to see how this type of organization developed further, the Ubaid period eventually ended with the rise of urban civilization, marking the beginning of early cities and more complex societal structures. The house with a central hall indicates a new approach to domestic architecture. This central hall was used as both a living space and a connecting area for other rooms, reflecting changes in how people organized their homes. The emergence of public buildings during this period, identified as temples or palaces, indicates a growing complexity in social organization and the beginnings of institutionalized roles within society. Settlements started to show signs of social differentiation, with some residents focusing on public service rather than food production, relying instead on the broader community for sustenance. As settlements in the Ubaid period grew and social structures became more complex, the foundations for early cities and urban centers were established, marking the transition from small-scale settlements to organized urban life. The Ubaid culture may have been a precursor to later Mesopotamian states, influencing the development of both the northern region of Assyria and the southern region of Sumer.